Howdy do, everybody. I just came across an article which is so disturbing. I have to read the entire article out loud so that this story gets heard. This is a story from the Responsible Statecraft website written by Ben Freeman, and it goes like this. At a time when the American public is expressing unprecedented levels of distrust in the Israeli government, Congress just proposed tying the U.S. to the Israeli military more than ever. Buried in the House's version of the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act released on Tuesday is Section 224, entitled United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. The provision would arguably do more to intertwine the U.S. military with the Israeli military than the more than $200 billion, inflation adjusted, in military assistance Israel has received from the U.S. since its founding in 1948. Section 224 lays the groundwork for bilateral research and development, co-production of weapons, joint ventures, licensing agreements, and I don't know who'd be in charge of that, and seemingly every manner of U.S.-Israeli military-industrial complex cooperation. The U.S. and Israel already work together heavily on missile defense, but this provision would greatly expand coordination to seemingly every area of defense tech, including AI, quantum, autonomous systems, directed energy, cyber, biotech, and many more. It also proposes network integration and data fusion. In other words, the U.S. military's data could soon be the Israeli military data. If fully enacted, this proposal would provide a higher level of military industrial integration than the U.S. has with any other country in the world. To be sure, the U.S. has worked closely with its NATO partners on co-production and shared supply chains, most notably via the Defense Production Action Plan, and as the number one arms dealer in the world, the U.S. provides weapons to militaries across the globe. But that is mostly a one-way street, with the U.S. providing weapons to foreign buyers who only occasionally make parts for those weapons themselves, as in the case of the F-35's global supply chain. Section 224 would be a different beast entirely. It would fuse the U.S. and Israeli defense sectors in multiple areas vital to the battlefields of the future, like autonomous systems and cyber. It would also bring extraordinary Israeli influence to the U.S. beyond what it already has through the Israel lobby and its robust network of social media influencers. It would give the Israeli government the opportunity to greatly expand one of the most powerful levers of influence in U.S. politics: jobs in the U.S. By expanding or starting new co-production facilities like it already has in Mississippi and Arkansas, the Israeli government could boast of providing jobs on U.S. soil, thereby securing allies among members of Congress who represent the districts where those jobs lie. The result could well be a U.S. political system even more susceptible to the whims of an Israeli government that seemingly has no qualms about drawing the U.S. into military conflicts in the Middle East. This unprecedented level of U.S.-Israeli military integration stands in stark contrast to the traditional aid model of defense cooperation, in which Israel already stood out as the top recipient of U.S. military assistance. As laid out in a recent Quincy Institute brief authored by one of us, Stephen Simon, this shift from an aid model to a military integration model has troubling implications, namely, the shift will strip away the political and diplomatic oversight mechanisms that make the relationship publicly accountable, moving it from a visible annual aid vote into the opaque machinery of defense acquisition, where oversight is limited and political accountability is minimal. The result would be a defense relationship that is simultaneously deeper and less transparent. This all comes at a time when the Israeli military has repeatedly used U.S. weapons in strikes that have violated international humanitarian laws in Gaza, and as Israel has repeatedly violated ceasefires, as has the U.S. itself, in the Trump administration's unnecessary war with Iran. The enormous gulf between what most Americans want and what the president is doing when it comes to Israel and what Congress is proposing here should not be ignored. Just 30% of respondents to a New York Times Siena poll from mid-May believe Trump made the right decision to go to war with Iran, while 64% saying it was wrong. An Institute for Global Affairs poll released earlier this week dove even deeper into the American psyche when it comes to arming Israel, finding that just 16% say the United States should keep supplying Israel with weapons without new restrictions. 38% want to stop supplying weapons entirely, and another 24% want weapons conditioned on how they're used. Yet mainstream leaders in both parties remain largely pro-Israel and continue to shape the base legislative text before amendments and broader congressional debate open it to the full body, as is in the case with this NDAA provision. Though slowly, tides within both parties are shifting as more and more members speak out against the growing divide between Israel's actions and America's interests. For example, Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, wrote in the New York Times on Tuesday that the Democratic Party has provided reflexive and unconditional support to Israeli governments, even as their actions have increasingly undermined American interests and values. On the Republican side of the aisle, Representative Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, and former Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene have openly decried the Israel lobby's corrosive influence, a stance that may have, at least partially, cost both of them their seats in Congress. What can other members of Congress who are concerned about Israel's destabilizing actions do right now? Stop the U.S.-Israeli military-industrial merger in its tracks. Lawmakers should reject Section 224 from the NDAA to avoid deep integration with Israel's military at a time when a growing number of Americans oppose Israel's actions in the region. Please think about this. That's all.